to order the Finance and Governments Committee for February 23rd, 2021. And roll call, and also we'll share the salute after, to the flag after that. Roll call.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Here.
Councilmember Basua,
Here.
Councilmember Teran.
Here.
Thank
And
you.
First of all, I'd like to call to a moment of silence before we do our Pledge of Allegiance for the 500,000 plus Americans that passed due to COVID-19. This is absolutely horrific, but we'll have a moment of silence after that for those 500,000 plus individuals that died of COVID since the pandemic started. So please follow me in the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. And today for public comments, we have one individual that'd like to speak on items not in the agenda, and that would be Lucy Cartagena Martinez. Lucy got 3 minutes.
Mayor,
Mhm.
Lucy Cartagena Martinez is not available at this time.
Okay, so should we give her 30 seconds? Since we. Okay. So we go ahead and continue, and we don't have any consent items. And so we have the reports, and our first report is the Public Works Department, and that's the appropriation of bond proceeds. And the recommendation is the Finance Committee, Governance Committee recommend to the City Council that we make some findings. The appropriation of bond proceeds is not a project pursuant to CEQA, and this is section 15061B3 and 15378. And number 2, approve the list of redevelopment bond proceeds and projects, an appropriation of $6,563,223 of 206 tax allocation bonds tab proceeds for streets and alleys, and resurfacing of parking lots improvements and fiber network expansion. And just for a reminder, this has been a pre-recorded item under Measure B, and we have our engineer, Tatiana. It's going to be available for any questions that our city council might have. Council members, do we have any questions for Tatiana? Okay. Councilmember Teran.
Thank you, Mayor Zaragoza. And thank you, Ms. Arano, for the presentation that was pre-recorded and posted and in compliance with Measure M. I'm looking at it now, and 30 views have been recorded for that on the city's YouTube channel. And so for any of the 30 people, probably 3 of those are my views, who haven't seen it, I'm hoping that they can take a look at that. But the item we have in front of us as a committee is actually a fairly important one. And one thing I'd like to bring up just as a couple of questions is something that I anticipate might come up as questions. So I'm asking so that hopefully this can be stated for the public record. In the recommendation for a reappropriation of those bond funds, we are taking those funds away from an expansion at the advanced water treatment facility, or purification facility, excuse me, and also away from a rehabilitation of the PAL building. And I'm just hoping that we can get a quick explanation about why that is, why we're having to take bond funding away from those original projects, And then a question I have in the one in the Ormond Beach area is why we're focusing on those streets specifically when streets in such the Southwinds neighborhood or the Cypress neighborhood are so nearby and also in need of repaving. And I just hope the public can hear, the reasoning behind that. So hopefully there's an understanding of why these streets are being paved versus others that are so nearby. And so if we could get an answer to that, I really appreciate the time and the response.
Tatiana, thank you, Council Member. Okay. Tatiana,
Tatiana, we can't hear you,
can
but
you-
it looks like you're answering.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
Fantastic. Thank you. Councilmember Turan, those are fantastic questions. So to start off with the first one, the reason for the reappropriation is, let's start with the AWPF, the Advanced Water Purification Facility. So at this time, we anticipate that it may take 2+ years to be able to actually acquire that land just north of the AWPF. And so because that's a longer lead project at this time, we would like to reappropriate the funds allocated to that to these shorter term projects that we can deliver within the next year or so. And I'd like to also mention that for the AWPF expansion, we have other sources of funding that we can tap into in the future to continue that project. They're not contingent upon this HERO funding right now. So that's pretty much our motivator there. We have this funding available. We have these shorter term projects. Some of them were already programmed in the CIP. So we're gonna go ahead and tackle those. As for the PAL facility, it's a similar concept. So that one we anticipate would take 2 to 3 years from now to actually program, design, and actually complete construction on. One of the limitations we have is that it's currently being used as a homeless shelter. So that's something that we have to contend with and could potentially impact schedules. So again, with the same thing in mind, where if we would like to spend this funding down sooner than that, we would be reappropriating it to alleyways within those HERO boundaries, because that's something that we can also deliver within the next year or so confidently. So that's really the driver for these reappropriations. And as far as why are we selecting the streets that we did in the Ormond Beach area, well, we're tied to the geographic boundaries of those Ormond Beach bond funds, right? So we are tackling all the streets that are found within those boundaries with this funding. Unfortunately, Southwinds and Cypress neighborhoods are not within those geographical boundaries.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor, if I could real quickly.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Ms. Arana. I really appreciate the response on that. And I just, as I was reading the report and I saw the presentation, I just thought those were things that jumped in my head and might come to the heads of others as well. So I appreciate the explanation. And I understand that these funds will expire. And so if there's a project we want to do that goes beyond the expiration of that, then we might as well be using it for something that we can utilize it for. So thank you for that explanation. And I hope people will watch the video. It's available there. But I appreciate that information. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council Member, go ahead. Councilwoman Basua.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted just to commend staff for taking a look at these budget appropriations that they're going to reconfigure and realizing that the projects that they had in mind were not going to be feasible and been able to be executed in the time frame allowed, and then having to come back to us. I just want to make sure that I commend staff for that, because so many times we kind of just think we're going to get something done and then it doesn't get done. I know the work that's going to be happening is in District 5. So I'm sure the businesses in that area are going to really appreciate all the work that is going to happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I would like to share a couple of words too. I want to thank Tatiana for the work that she's done and her staff. In fact, I talked to her today, and one of the things that Tatiana mentioned to me that this work has been done by not just her, but a lot of individuals, engineers that I think are really important that we share and commend them for that. The important thing is that apparently this expenditures and the hero bonds are restricted to that area, and consequently, I think as the council member remember why there. But I think this is something that it's going to be it's good use that we use that hero funding, and of course the two items that the AWF and also the PAL, they can come later. And one of the questions I had, and maybe Tatiana can put this down in her list, is this apparently will be, hopefully we're not going to forget this project. They're going to come up in the future. Let me have I'm getting a response here. What's happening? Anyway.
Yes. So
Um,
the
hold on.
project will remain in the CIP. So we will be planning on doing these in the future.
Tatiana, we're having a feedback here, so let's see if we can correct it. Mhm. Where is it? Is it here? Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, they're still having feedback. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
For our listeners, we're having a little trouble. Little technical
The
problems.
technical problems.
So why don't we test another mic?
Okay.
It may just be yours.
May just be yours.
Oh, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that
Testing 1,
better?
2, 3. Is that better?
Same.
Same.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. That's too low. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
That sounds better. The feedback's gone.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. Tatiana, the other thing that I wanted to mention was I believe that the usage of this hero bond funding is extremely important, because I believe that this funding can be used for alleys that are really, really important. I was looking at your report, and the report, we're talking about the alleys, or the PCI and the alleys. There's 11 alleys that run from 0 to 18. And in fact, yesterday I had the opportunity to go out and visit one of those alleys, and it was absolutely none but dirt. And so I think, those alleys. And also the more feedback. The work is great because it's really helping South Oxnard as a disadvantaged community that really needs those alleys to be repaired. And also the other thing that Tatiana, that I wanted to find out is that fiber expansion. What is that going to do? Number one, to have the fiber expansion. And lastly, how long is this project? What's the timeline for this project?
The fiber expansion, the purpose is to provide high-speed internet access to those businesses in the Ormond Beach area. So that's the primary purpose there, right? It's an area. It's following the fiber master plan, and so this was just an opportunity we found with this funding source that became available to us. If we're going to be resurfacing the road, might as well put the fiber in before we do that now, ahead of everything else. And as far as the timing goes, we anticipate to be fully done with construction by around this time next year. We're hoping January, February of 2022 will be completely wrapped up with all of these projects.
Well, that's outstanding.
Well, that's outstanding. So
this
we
is
look
1
at
year
this
then.
in 1 year then.
That is really great.
That is really great. But
The feedback is
the
horrible, but
feedback
I
is horrible, but I
just want to share that
just want to share that
those 11 alleys
those
really
11
need a
alleys
lot of
really
work.
need a lot of work.
And I want to thank you for that. And again, it's good
And
that we're
again,
going to
it's
do
good
that
that
for
we're going
South
to do that for
Oxnard.
South Oxnard.
As I mentioned before, a
As I mentioned
disadvantaged
before, a
community, and
disadvantaged
it's much
community, and
needed.
it's much needed.
And as
And
the city managers mentioned
city
before, we're
managers
going to
mentioned
start
before,
working in
we're going to
South
start working in
Oxnard.
South
And that's
Oxnard.
going to be part of
That's
our
going to be
work
part
that
of
we're
our
going to do
work
here
that
next
we're going to do
Thursday.
here next Thursday.
So thank you again.
So thank you again,
Tatiana. I know I'm
Tatiana. I
double
know
talking
I'm
here,
double talking here.
but however, I just want to
However,
thank
I just want to
you
thank
and your
you and
engineers
your
and
engineers
Public Works for the
and
good work
Public
you're
Works for
doing.
the good work they're doing.
I think the feedback is coming through Tatiana's system because hers is routed through the Mars Perseverance rover.
Okay.
There we go.
So is that better? So anything else, council members, that we'd like to share with Tatiana and again, this is a pre-recorded item, and we have no speakers on this item. So what's the pleasure of the council?
I'll move the recommended action, Mayor.
Recommendation by
Second.
Basua and second by Tehran. Roll call.
Councilmember Turan,
Yes.
Councilmember Basua,
Aye.
Mayor Zaragoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
And thank you. And that's approved. Our next item is again the Finance Department Audit Committee training by Eddie and Payne on fundamentals of principal finance with a guided analysis of city CAFRs and single audit reports. And so we have our consultants. And Kevin, you want to share anything? Or so we should start with the consultants.
Mayor, we will start with Don Ecker of Edie and Payne. Don?
Okay, thank you. Welcome again. Mhm.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be back with everyone. And as you know, Mayor and the City Council, as well as the City Manager and the Finance team, this is our second in a series of 4. This evening, we have the same team back. We have 15 slides that we're going to walk through, hundreds of pages of reports, and our goal is to make it simple and as understandable as possible. Hong will cover the first 6 slides, and then Mary will actually dive into the CAFR, and Eden will wrap it up with the single audit. And we will do that in 45 minutes and be ready for questions. Hong.
Mary will be sharing the slides. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. We're very happy to be back here tonight.
Welcome, Mary. Go ahead.
Can't quite see the slides yet, Mary. So just me.
Sorry, give me a second. Let me try that again.
So my name is Hong Lin. I'm the transitioning partner while Mary gets the slides up. We're providing this workshop to give you the tools you need as members of the Finance and Governance Committee.
Sorry, it tells me that the screen sharing is paused.
So on our screen, it shows, it says that you started screen sharing, but it's still a blank screen right now. This obviously is also routing all the way to Mars and back.
Our city clerk is looking to allow the screen share.
Right.
So we're clicking through a few things. Just give us one moment.
Okay.
Would you please try it again?
Sure.
Not yet, but we know it worked last time, so we'll figure it out.
Yes, of course.
Mary, do you want to email it to me real quick and I can do it from my laptop, my desktop?
Sure.
And I'll just navigate every time you say next.
We can do that, yes. Oh, I see someone.
There we go.
Okay, now it's like we're
That's
seeing
on.
something.
It looks like it.
So we see your screen.
I don't think that was mine.
Okay, go ahead and email it to me. We'll try it.
Yes, hold it.
We'll take a technical commercial. Hang on.
Yeah.
So the audience, we're almost there. Thank you for
Screen share.
bearing with us.
Should I make her a host or a co-host?
No, she's a participant, right?
Right.
No, you're fine with that.
It's on its way.
So you can share it? Okay. Right.
Did you add her as a panelist?
Who's that?
Yeah, she's a panelist.
Yes, they're all panelists here.
Okay. Should we go through that?
There you go. Thank you, council member.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just move along to the agenda with so I'll be going the first 4 items, just a generic overview of fundamentals of municipal finance, and then Mary will go over the comprehensive financial report, or the CAFRA in short, and then Eden will go over the single audit report. So next slide, please. I will stop for questions after each section, so feel free to speak up as we're going along. Okay, so the first section that I wanted to go over with you tonight is the stakeholders of financial reporting. To understand the purpose of municipal finance, we think it's important to know who your stakeholders are. Financial reports act as a scorecard by which the city is held accountable by their stakeholders. These financial reports tell them how their money was spent, the financial condition or the financial strength of the organization, whether there was an operating deficit or a surplus, your current resources or long-term commitments, whether you were in compliance with applicable rules or regulations. So we consider the following your key stakeholders. In the circle, first and foremost, your community, council members, and the mayor and council members. You are part of the community and are directly elected to serve on behalf of the Oxnard community. Your community are residents, businesses, and organizations that provide services in and around Oxnard. They pay taxes and fees directly into the organization and benefit from the services that the city provides. Your financial reports provide transparency to them of how their money got spent, to you as well, of course. For example, your CAFRA tells them that for 2020, 49% or almost $115 million of the city's expenditures went to public safety. It gives you and the community resources and information to prioritize your services and measure the results. Next, we have your employees. Your employees are direct stakeholders because they rely on the stability and fiscal strength of the city for their livelihood. You are actually one of the top 10 employers in the city of Oxnard. Not only do they rely on their current paycheck, but also in the future through pension and OPEB benefits. These liabilities total approximately $297 million as of June 30th, 2020. Financial reporting also gives you and management the tools you need to negotiate with your unions. I was made aware of their interest in the annual financial statements very early on in my career, and quite surprisingly, but I think that's still the case currently. Moving on, we have the bondholders. In this group, we also include your bond rating agencies. You are required to provide annual financial reports or disclosures to them because they use these reports to determine the strength of their investment, your bonds that have been issued. The more financially sound your organization's financial reporting, the more secure the investment. This became apparent with your recent increases and positive outlooks in your bond ratings. These outlooks and positive ratings were a direct results of the improvements that were made by management over the last few years. Lastly, we have listed your state and federal stakeholders. These two are somewhat related, not completely, because although both act as oversight in the single audit process to monitor grant spending and compliance, the state has more interest specifically in Oxnard because they require separate annual financial reporting of your financial information and compensation. They also have direct influence on specific revenue sources that the city receives. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, I have a question. So the scorecard, if I heard you correctly, as the stakeholders are, the ones that we are responsible for, the community, and the bondholders, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that scorecard also used by S&P for a credit rating for the city?
Absolutely, yes.
So that really is really important that once we meet with S&P that we share that information and the scorecard, which really gives us a rating of plus, whatever, the number is, that's extremely important.
Absolutely. It saves you money in future refundings. There are many benefits to having a positive outlook and a good score.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Next slide, please. Next, we are listing key components of financial reporting. We have listed a tool icon. Actually, throughout these slides, you will see we have little tool icons for items that we think might be of use to you in the future to reference back to as you are a part of the committee. In this little table, we have presented the key components of financial reports. These will help you review the financial reports and are made up of the various type of reports, who the users are, and what the contents are. On the left, we have listed a few reports that might be of particular interest to you. And although I won't be going over everything, Mary will be going over the comprehensive annual financial report in detail, and then grant compliance is obviously, of course, closely related to the single audit report, which Eden will go over. Tonight, I wanted to highlight an external report, like we just mentioned, which is the bond disclosures. Bond disclosures and reporting, like we just discussed, are very important, mainly because they are an external requirement and it could affect your ratings if not done properly. Bond monitoring and reporting involves timely filing, regular monitoring of ratio requirements, and timely and proper bond spending, like you just mentioned as part of the public works projects. And in extreme cases, if not done properly, it could even have a financial impact on the city due to the risk of the bonds being called due to non-compliance, or risk of penalties or returning funds if not timely spent. As you might know, this was actually the case only a few years ago, before management put measures into place to increase your utility fees, water fees. To highlight an internal report, I'd like to go over the capital improvement reports. And very appropriately, this ties into your previous item. This was unplanned, but really works out. The capital improvements reports, we think, are important because they are related to the biggest assets or investments that belong to the city. As Mary will mention later, your total assets, approximate $3 billion, of which your capital assets make up almost half of it, I believe. So these assets include your infrastructure, your buildings, equipment, utilities, facilities, and generally it's prudent to consider regular maintenance, replacement, and like mentioned just earlier, new investment in your city's capital assets to be able to provide continuous and improved service to your businesses and residents. As mentioned earlier, these projects take a lot of planning and a considerable time to implement. So it would be important for management to periodically present these to you so that timely decisions can be made. Any question on this slide?
Another question again, going back to the bonds. Interest, the credit rating of the city is really important. The type of interest that we get on those bonds that potentially will impact the ratepayers. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep. It provides money savings going forward. So right. that leaves you with more resources to invest in other items in your budget.
And the better the rating, the better interest we get on those bonds.
Yep.
Thank you. Council members, no? Any questions? If not, we'll continue with Mary.
Next slide, please. Then we have provided you with a summary financial dashboard. These are just a few example items, but just things that we want you to think about as you're reviewing various financial reports, that there could be financial metrics that are involved when you review them, people metrics, and communication. So I won't go over all the financial metrics, but an important one that we listed is a review of variance from budget to actual expenditures and revenues. These review items help you in operations going forward, and and to understand how much resources you will have available going into the next period. The better the projections or the better your budgets, the better the results are. So you want budget to actuals that are close to your budgeted amounts. Then your people metrics, high staff turnover would be an indication of a particular risk of where departments might not be operating as efficiently as they could. So that could result in late reporting, like we have listed under communications, or inadequate reporting. These are late or inadequate reporting is often an indicator by outside agencies of an organization that is at risk or does not have proper processes and procedures in place. Lastly, I wanted to list the qualified auditors report. And that is an item that we, as your independent auditors, are directly involved with, or were. Actually, even a few years ago, the city had a qualified auditors report for capital assets. And what that means is that the city did not have sufficient information for us to provide an auditor opinion on. So that, of course, is never good. But luckily, in the most few recent years, you were issued a clean opinion. So that is, again, an indicator of the financial strength or fiscal strength and operations, efficient operations of your organization. Any questions on this slide?
No, council members?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. When I looked at the presentation before, this slide really jumped out at me because I think for the general public to understand, this may seem very high level as far as municipal finances and how this works and everything. And it can be fairly complex, but this, to me, I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Nguyen, but if we were to connect this to an everyday person's budget, that first example metric there, operating expenses are greater than revenues by 5% or more for a period of time. Well, if that was my monthly expenses are greater than my income that comes in every single month, then I can only do that for so long, right? The next one, debt service. If my credit card debt or my personal debt for car loans or my mortgage or whatever I'm indebted to is greater than a certain amount of what I bring in every month, then I can only do that for so long. And then mid-year variances. So if I were to look at my budget and I have an idea of what it's going to be for a period of time, but there's these variances. Maybe I get a bonus at work. Maybe I have an unexpected car repair or a refrigerator, something like that. These are variances that I didn't plan for, but I need to see if it's going to happen. But I can only do so much of a variance or so many variances within a period of time. And lastly is depletion of reserves. If I have to keep tapping into my savings to meet my monthly obligations or my monthly expenses, then there's something going on there that's an indicator I need to review how much I'm spending and how much I'm bringing in. So is my example there, is that accurate, or is that too simplistic for the general public?
It's very accurate. So thank you for that. I wish you'd done my slide then. No, I completely agree. And yes, governmental accounting and financial presentation might seem complex, but if you bring it down to your these core items, you're absolutely right. You look at it the same way, and you even want to be more prudent because it's not your money you're spending, it's your community's money you're spending, right? So no, thank you for that. I absolutely agree.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Council Member. We have another question.
Yes.
Okay, the other, I have a question there that you mentioned there in communications. What I think is extremely important is qualified auditors report. I think that's extremely important because you want to see the financial picture and make sure that our scorecard is in order. So I think that qualified auditors report is extremely important to share with the policymakers. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Governmental gap. We know you're not accountants. We're not trying to make you accountants at all. Governmental gap means general accepted accounting principles, which are our accounting standards. What we want you to have a key takeaway from this slide is that governmental accounting is not like for-profit accounting. Governmental accounting is generally a little bit more complex because there are multiple measurement focus, as you can see here in the table, and accounting bases within the same set of financial statements or within the one set of reports. And what we have summarized here for you is which reports are presented on an economic resources or full accrual basis, which are the government-wide statements, your proprietary funds, and your fiduciary funds. And that means that because they look at your economic resources, so your long-term assets and long-term liabilities that belong to the cities. Economic resources or full accrual means that these statements will present these items to you. Governmental funds is presented on a current financial resources or a modified accrual basis. The outlook on these financial statements is shorter. It's just looking forward a year or less from your fiscal year end. So that means you might include accounts receivable and accounts payable that are due right after year end, or that you have coming or have to pay right after year end, but they don't look further beyond those activities than a year. Any questions on this slide?
Any questions, council members? Okay, if not, then I think Mary's up, right?
Yes, Mary will move forward with your guide through the CAFR. And because of technical difficulties, this will be slightly different than what we have planned, but I'm sure Mary will take care of it and she'll get you through it.
Thank you, Mary. Okay.
Thank you for that transition, Hong. My name is Mary. I'm the Senior Manager on the Oxnard engagement. And as promised, we're back to give you a more detailed walkthrough of the financial reporting. I will be going over your comprehensive annual financial report. We often call it the CAFR for short. And as you might have already seen the hard copy, this document is quite voluminous. It's actually over 200 pages. Guess what we're doing tonight, guys? I'm just kidding. We will not be going over all 200 pages tonight. In fact, it took your finance department and our team hundreds of hours to come up with these pages. It's almost impossible to get through this within the little amount of time we have tonight. My goal is to give you a better idea of the different sections in the CAFR, so you can be more familiar with what kind of information is included in it and have an idea where to look if you're looking for something specific. However, if you're curious for any details on specific line items or balances, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to your finance department. You have a really solid and strong team with a lot of knowledge, and they're very committed individuals who know the details behind these numbers more than anyone else. So take advantage of that. So there are three main sections in the CAFR. The introductory section, the financial section, and last but not the least, the statistical section. Let's start with your introductory section. There are a few items in this section, but the key one would be the letter of transmittal. It's the letter that is printed on the city's letterhead. And this is an excellent read if you're looking for something more subjective and forward-looking. And the statement is actually made by your city manager. It addresses the government's economic conditions and provides you an overview of the city's main focuses for the next periods to come. As for your second section, it starts with two documents: your report of, your independent auditor's report, and your management discussion and analysis. The first one you will encounter is your independent auditor's report. This is 4 pages long, and I know it doesn't sound like much, but these 4 pages are the 4 pages we are particularly proud of because they are ours. The rest of the CAFR truly belongs to the city and was prepared by the city, but the auditor's report is ours. And this is where we share the opinions paragraph with you. That is the section where we tell you whether you have a clean opinion, which is what you're usually looking for, or if there were any issues that resulted in a qualification. We've already mentioned it in the previous meetings, but the city was able to maintain its clean opinion for fiscal year 20. So again, congratulations to everyone who have worked hard to get the city to that point. Following that would be the management discussion and analysis. You will more commonly hear us call this the MD&A. This letter is provided by your CFO, and it is intended to be an objective, backward-looking analysis of the government's financial statements. This area also includes a discussion of basic financial statements and any significant variances that the CFO wants to highlight or explain. There's also a set of condensed comparative financial data and various analysis of overall results, balances, and budgetary variations. And then lastly, there are also discussions of currently known facts, decisions, or conditions of future significance. All right, that's it with our first slide. Are there any questions I can answer?
Council members, any questions? Okay, if not, we'll continue.
All right, here comes the interesting part. For the following section, I was going to walk you through your actual CAFR. I wanted to share my screen and walk you through the PDF. I highlighted some items. I don't think we will be able to do that unless, do you want me to send the file over to you and you can click through my bookmarks?
We can probably do that if we can, yeah.
We could do that, okay.
Yeah.
Is there an email you want me to send it to specifically?
City manager, Assistant City, you wanted to share?
Councilmember Tron, are you the one sharing the screen now? Yes. Would you be able to continue sharing with that separate one?
I think that she has it on her computer, and I mean, she could send it for sure, but anybody who has it can share the screen. I'm wondering if she can try sharing her screen and see if that would work
I was gonna suggest that.
if she's on a different device.
Well, if we can't, then we.
Try again. Sure. If not, we'll just
Well, just continue, right?
Okay.
You're gonna try and share?
I will attempt again.
Hold on a second, let me see what okay.
Fingers crossed. Is it working?
Can't do it.
Mary, why don't you just refer to page numbers, and then at their leisure, they can go back and look in the future.
Yeah, why don't we do that? That could probably work better. Thank you.
All right, we can do that, absolutely. So I was going to start with walking you through with the table of content, but we can skip to page 25, which is the first statement part of your government-wide statements. It's called the Statement of Net Position, which
Mary, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we have you try to stop sharing, and we'll get Councilmember Tron to bring the actual PowerPoint back up that we were using, and then you can refer to those page numbers.
Oh, good.
Someone has it up. Yes. I think Hong is sharing the screen. Is that right?
Are you seeing anything or no?
Yeah, I see the.
I see the pagoda.
You see the CAFR?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, I will assist Mary during this section of the presentation.
Okay.
All right, good teamwork.
That worked out well. Thank you so
I
much.
have the slides as well.
Okay, if you could kindly click on TOC on the left-hand side and my bookmarks. We have already talked about the introductory section, and I have started with the financial section.
Okay.
What we will be going over now is your government-wide financial statements, followed by your fund financial statements, including governmental funds, proprietary funds, and fiduciary funds. Okay, if we jump to your bookmarks and then click on Statement of Net Position. Here you go. So this is the very first statement of your government-wide statements. It's called the Statement of Net Position, but essentially it's your balance sheet. If you look at the elements that are presented here, you have your assets, you have your liabilities, and at the bottom you have your net position. What I highlighted over here is, and I wanted to draw your attention to, is the city's total assets is almost $3 billion. That's a lot, and that's between your governmental activities and your business type activities. And I want you to see that the majority of that balance is due to capital assets. That alone is about 2.5 million, right? And a fun fact is when we started auditing the city of Oxnard about 6 years ago, the capital assets was actually part of the reason why we were not able to issue a clean opinion at the time, because the records were incomplete and unreliable, and we just couldn't work with it. But since then, your management team has put in a lot of resources, time, and effort to clean those records up and hire a third party to get everything up to standard and up to date. And today we can confidently say that your capital assets are reasonably stated. So again, that's something you can be proud of.
So Mary, that's everything included, capital assets and all the funding that the city has is $3 billion.
Yes, that
Okay,
is correct.
thank you. Okay.
Moving on to the bottom part of this page, for anyone looking with me on their actual copy, this is page 25. You have your total liabilities here. What liabilities are your obligations. We see the city has a total of about $830 million. Majority of it is due to your net pension liabilities. And then the remaining bulk is due to your capital leases and revenue bonds. And then at the very bottom, you have your net positions. Your net position is what is left over after you take all your assets minus all your liabilities. And this area is a nice snapshot of the breakdown if you have any restrictions and if there's anything left over after all of those restrictions have been taken into consideration. Okay. Hong, if you could click on statement of activities. The statement of activities is essentially your income statement for your government-wide activities. I know it looks a little bit different than the usual revenue minus expenses, and that is due to governmental accounting standards, which requires that expenses are presented by function or by programs, which might make it a little bit easier for you to read actually for the purposes of your duties. You can see on here that $115 million of your total expenses go to public safety, whereas $35 million goes to culture, leisure, and libraries. And then you can also see the breakdown for your business type activities. Statement of activities number 2. All right, this is the second page of your statement of activities. It's a continuation of it. But what I wanted to point out here is the change in net position. And what this is after you take all your revenues and all your expenditures, this is what is left over. This is what gives you an idea whether the city was able to perform or leave a deficit or could end the year with a surplus for the fiscal year. So definitely numbers you want to pay attention to and take a look where the big deficits are coming from, if any. Okay, moving on to the governmental balance sheet. Thank you, Hong. Okay, your governmental balance sheet looks, at first glance, looks exactly like the first one that I've shown you, correct? But just as Hong has mentioned a few slides ago, the governmental funds are different because they have a different measurement focus and accounting basis. It excludes all long-term assets and long-term liabilities. And as you can see here, the bulk of your assets, which was earlier capital assets, is not even shown on here, and that's just governmental accounting. And also another difference that you will notice is there are far more columns on this statement. And what these columns mean are they are your major funds. A major fund is determined if they meet a certain threshold that make them significant enough to be individually presented in their own special column on the face of your financial statements. If we move on to the next page, we can see there's a non-major column, and what this does is it's actually an aggregate column of all the other remaining funds that did not make that threshold. There's a section in the CAFR that breaks all of these down. It's called the supplementary information, and I will point it out again once we get to that part of the CAFR. Moving on to the reconciliation balance sheet. Okay, so the reconciliation of the balance sheet of governmental funds to the statement of net position is the page that converts your governmental funds to your government-wide activities. As Hong has mentioned earlier, there are variances, and this is the page that details it line item by line item, what is different between those two. I'm not going to go over all of them, but just to stick to my example that I've been bringing up, capital assets here, as you can see, gets added back. So it gets accounted for on the government-wide level. Can now move on to the government IS bookmark, which is your statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances for your governmental funds. For this one, Hong, could you please scroll to the bottom? I want to point out again the net change in fund balance, and this is for each major fund. So it helps you determine which of your major funds are operating at a deficit and which ones are operating at a surplus. Okay, moving on to the reconciliation. This is very similar to the previous reconciliation that I've talked about. The main difference, however, is the first one was converting or reconciling your balance sheet items to the government-wide statements, whereas this one is focused on your income statement items to be reconciled. All right. Then we move on to your proprietary funds. Your proprietary funds are your utilities, such as water, wastewater, and environmental services. This is the statement of net position. What also gets included in here, and which might not be obvious from the start, is if you could click on prop balance sheet 2, is the Oxnard Housing Authority. The Oxnard Housing Authority is a legally separate entity. They have their own accounting, and they even get audited by different auditors. However, they are considered a blended component unit of the city, which requires the city to include them in the CAFR. We actually relied on the other auditors' report and just adapted their numbers to be included in the city's CAFR. And then also included in here is your internal service funds. Your internal service funds are funds within the city that act as intermediaries. What that means is, for example, if you have an insurance policy with a third party and you have employees that are insured in various funds, your general fund, your water fund, your environmental services fund, they won't write each fund won't write their own check and send it to the insurance company. They will all transfer those resources to the internal service funds, who then consolidates all those payments and then write one big check to your insurance company. So that's the main role of your internal service funds, and just know that it gets included in your proprietary statements. Moving on to the proprietary income statement. The official name for it is Statement of Revenues, Expenses, and Changes in Net Position. Here again, typically with income statements, what we want you to first look at is the changes in net position to determine the deficit and the surplus, and then work your way backwards from there. See what were the revenues, what were the expenses, what happened. Okay. A statement that might be of your interest is the statement of cash flows, and that is if you are particularly interested in knowing where cash is coming from and where cash is going to. And this is, again, only focused on your proprietary funds, so your utilities, Oxnard Housing Authority, and the internal service funds. And then we are now with our fiduciary funds. There you go. There are two statements. So the statement of fiduciary net position and then the changes. Important to note here is that fiduciary funds do not get included in your government-wide statements, because although these assets are presented here and the city is holding on to these assets, they do not belong to the city. The city is only the custodian of these assets, and this is just for reporting purposes. All right, we actually got through all the financial statements. Are there any questions that I can answer before I can move on to the notes?
Yeah, Mary, and I probably missed it because it's hard to see the fine print here, but
Mhm.
this is the fiscal year ending numbers, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and the question I have is, how do we compare to the prior years? If
Oh, yes. You have comparative statements in the MD&A, your management discussion and analysis. Thank you, Hong, for jumping onto that. And you can see it here this is the only place where you would find it.
Okay.
The CAFR. Otherwise, you would have to have both CAFRs next to each
So I
other.
was just getting ahead of myself, but that's that way we can see prior years and how we're doing, if we're doing okay or if we're falling behind and why and so forth.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Mary, give them the page number.
Page, the MD&A starts on page 5 of the CAFR.
Okay. And so that kind of gives you a picture of, are we doing okay? Are we falling behind or with comparable years?
And your CFO has provided a great narrative on those as well.
Is that's the same for the utilities, private,
Yes, they have a
proprietary agent. Okay, thank you. Any questions, council members? Okay.
Great. Hong, if you could please click on Summary of Significant Accounting Policies. This is the start of the notes to the financial statements, and these are also the policies I referred to during the last workshop. So if you want, they do start on page, on page 48 for your reading pleasures. There's a lot of detail in there, so you can go ahead and do that. After the summary of significant accounting policies, you have your detailed notes on all funds. Hong, if you could click on Detail LTD. There you go. You have detailed note disclosures on all your significant balances. However, for today's workshop, I just picked a long-term debt for demonstration purposes. If you scroll down towards the bottom, the total of the table, we can see here that the balance as of June 30, 2020 was $107 million. This is something that you would find on the face of your financial statements. If you're anything like me, you would want to know what is behind those numbers, what makes up that number, right? And this table does a great job of explaining that. You can see it consists of various lease revenue bonds, as well as lease purchase agreements, and also capital lease obligations. Hong, if you could click on Detail LTD2, the next bookmark. This is just a few pages after that table. You will find narratives on each of the outstanding debt. And it gives you some more details, such as when was it issued, what was the purpose of it, the interest rate that's associated with it. If it was refunded, it would be explained in here too. So it gives you a lot more context and background behind these. And also interesting, maybe for budgetary purposes, is it provides you a table of your debt service obligations for the next 5 years for your principal and your interest obligations. And then after the first 5 years, it shows up in 5-year increments up until maturity. All right. Another note disclosure that I think would be of great benefit to you in your role is the risk management note disclosure. This goes over your general liabilities as well as workers' compensation claims and obligations. Moving on to commitments. Your CAFR also includes any significant commitments and contingencies. For example, here you have your significant constructions and your outstanding purchase orders on the next page. And then we have your risk and uncertainties. This is where we have brief summaries of any outstanding litigations and a quick status update on where they're at. So something that, if you're just wondering what's going on legal wise, this is probably the spot to go to. And then the CAFR has its required supplementary information. What is included in the required supplementary information is your budgetary comparison schedule. If you click on that, there you go. And this one is quite interesting because it shows you your budget and your actual, and the very right column shows you your variances. And if we skip down all the way to the bottom, we can actually see that the general fund group had $7.5 million of less expenditures, actual expenditures than budgeted. And then this schedule also drills down by department. So if you want to see which departments were able to stay within budget and which ones had to go over, maybe due to overtime or unforeseen events, this is the only part of the CAFR where you would be able to drill down on a department basis.
And Mary, that gives you a picture of if they can do corrective action in a particular department or expenditures that might be corrected to come out with probably a better budgeting procedure for the future.
Mm-hmm. This definitely gives you a tool to narrow down where you can, tighten it a little bit more going forward.
Some adjustments, yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you.
All right, moving on to your supplementary information. I briefly hinted at this earlier. This section is where it breaks down your non-major columns. So it will provide the balance sheet as well as the income statement and the budgetary comparison schedule for each of those funds. So this is a lot more detailed, and I really suggest you only go in here if you know what you're looking for, because this is a lot of pages of, it's a lot of funds back to back, and it might get a little bit overwhelming. We did include descriptions of those non-major funds there for you as well. All right, on to the last section, which is your statistical section. This section is actually not audited. We did, however, perform limited procedures on these just to make sure that they are consistent throughout the numbers are consistent throughout the document. But what these are is a lot of data. It's actually a 10-year data trend for these categories. So it does not only include financial trends, but it also includes demographics and economic information, such as, who are the principal employers in the city of Oxnard. And then also operating information that goes into your full-time employees and just how the city is structuring its day-to-day operations and how that has been changing over the past 10 years. So something that you might want to look at in more detail later on. Well, that concludes my part of this workshop. Thank you so much for your help, Hong, with our technical difficulties. I think we were able to resolve that quite nicely. Do you have any questions I can answer before I pass it on to Eden?
Council members, any questions? Okay, Council Member Turan.
Great. Thank you again for the walkthrough of the CAFR. Really appreciate it. A quick thing, I think it's probably more of a question for staff, but would this version of the document with the bookmarks be able to be made available maybe with the notes from tonight's meeting? So that way someone who watches this meeting in the future will have this to correspond to the presentation as well, if they want to look at those bookmarks more in detail.
I think
Ashley.
Oh.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say, Councilmember Tron, I'm not sure if that's positive to load it that way on our website. The video will be available, but I can definitely check with IT about that capability. And if nothing else, have like a summary sheet of the notes that Mary just went through of matching that back up to the PowerPoint. City Manager, when did you want to add to that?
We can also look at attaching a link to this video where the budget portal is. So it's all in a similar space.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. That's a very, very comprehensive report, you know, and so then we'll go ahead and continue. Mhm.
So if you have no more questions, will continue with the single audit report. Thank you, Mary, for that very informative presentation. So good evening, everyone. I'm Eden, and I'm happy to be back here to continue our workshop series. Tonight, I'm going to share with you the various components of the single audit report. So why do we believe the single audit report is important? As you know, it is a requirement, and it is required both by the federal government and the state government. But did you know that in 2018 and 2019, federal awards make up 3% of the city's governmental expenditures? 3% doesn't seem to be very much, but consider what services you were able to provide because of these funds being available to you. Just to name a couple, you have improvement of roads and bridges from the Department of Transportation. You also have some additional services, housing services for the city's residents, courtesy of the Housing and Urban Development. In 2020, that amount jumped to 5% with the addition of Coronavirus Relief Fund. And with these funds, you were able to supplement revenues that you lost due to COVID-19 in order to pay for salaries and benefits of public safety personnel. So for the federal government and the state government, the single audit is a way to determine whether recipients of federal grants comply with the rules and regulations. But it is, for the city, it is more than that. It's also a report that tells you whether deficiencies exist in the city's internal controls, and if any deficiencies do exist, how the city as an organization plans to correct them. So as the city that oversees the city's, the committee that oversees the city's internal controls, as we had discussed in the first session, this report is a must read. So I wanted to go over the basic components of the single audit report because of that. So there's 4 components that I wanted to go over. The first one is the internal control report. The second one is the report on major federal programs. The third one is a schedule of expenditures of federal awards, or what I would refer to, during this presentation as the SEFA. SEFA, and then the schedule of findings and question costs. So it is important to note at this point that, when you read a single audit report, you should read it in conjunction with the CAFR because it will be referred to throughout the report. So on this slide here is the first of 4 components, the internal control over financial reporting and compliance. So this report is required by government auditing standards. In this report, we are not providing an opinion on the effectiveness of the city's internal control. However, we will point out if there are any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal control over financial reporting. The report defines what a significant deficiency is and what a material weakness is, and then it directs you to the schedule of findings and question costs, where the findings will be described in more detail. So as I said earlier, the schedule of findings and question costs is component number 4 of this report. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is the second component, the report on major federal programs. There's actually 3 reports within this component. The first one is a report on compliance for each major federal programs, and then a report on internal control over compliance, and then a report on the CFA. So the very first one, well, first of all, I want to say that these reports are all required by uniform guidance. And the uniform guidance is a government-wide framework for grants management. It's issued by the Office of Management and Budgets, and it is the authoritative set of rules and regulations for federal awards. So that's where all of these information is included. So the report on compliance of each major program, which is the first bullet point there, the main thing to look at when you're looking at this report is the opinion paragraph. So this in this report, the auditor will state whether or not the city complies with the requirements of federal awards. So that's the main thing to look at in that report. The internal control report over compliance. Again, this one is very similar to the one that I previously talked about regarding internal control over financial reporting. This one, though, focuses on compliance with major federal programs. Again, no opinion is expressed on internal control over compliance. And then the schedule of, there's a report on the CFA, or the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. The CFA is a supplementary schedule that is supplementary to the basic financial statements that Mary had talked about, which are included in the CAFR. So even though the basic financial statements are included in the CAFR, the CFA is included in the single audit report. So this opinion will refer to the basic financial statements for its opinion. So those are the first two components. Before I get to the third component, can I answer any questions?
Council members, any questions? Okay, if not, we'll continue.
Good. So the report for the single audit report, before I move on to the details of this third component, will be presented to you for 2020, probably in March. It is still in the draft format right now, and we're making sure that we're putting our finishing touches on it. So when we come back here for in March, we will be presenting that report to you.
Thank you.
So number 3 on our 4 components is the CFA. So the CFA is a schedule that actually shows the total amount of federal grants spent by the city in a fiscal year. So it's broken down by program. So for example, CDBG program will have a total. It's broken down by pass-through entities. So you will see in that CFA whether the programs were distributed from, say, the state or the county. And then it's also broken down by agency. So each, for example, you will have a total for all programs that are coming from HUD, for example, or Department of Treasury. And then in that CFA, it is also provided, the amounts provided to subrecipients are also included in there. And then following the CFA is the schedule of findings and question costs. There is a summary of findings. It's like a 1-page where you will see all the, if there were any weaknesses, material weaknesses were found, or any significant deficiencies were found. The summary will also tell you what major programs were audited. And then following that is an index that lists the findings by number. And then following the index, you will see a description of all the findings. And this is the one that you probably need to drill down into. The elements of the finding will include the criteria. So we will say, what is the basis of the finding? And then we will say what, the condition, which is the finding itself. Normally, it would state that the city did not comply with the criteria that was required. Then we will also talk about what the causes were, as well as what the effects are of not complying with the criteria. But most importantly, in the findings, you should look at the recommendations as well as the city's responses, which will include a corrective action plan. Because the corrective action plan is something that you will, management will actually provide you a status on or progress report. I believe every quarter or every 6 months. So that is something that you should probably look into more. Before I close, I have a story to tell about the city's schedule of findings and question costs. You probably heard about it before, but I'd like to tell it again because it shows how well the city has done to improve its internal control. So 6 years ago, after our first audit of the city, the schedule of finding costs contained 111 findings. 1 year later, it actually increased to 116. 2 years later, fortunately, that number started to go down. And it wasn't an easy task for the city. The recovery and rebuilding of your financial statement or financial systems and your internal control in general took, several years. But due to the commitment by the city, especially this committee that you are in, and then the consistent efforts of the finance department and city management, in 2020, we have some good news, a lot better news than last year. When we report in the single audit for 2020 next month, you will be very pleasantly surprised. I'm not going to tell you how many still remains and what's the results of that audit yet. You'll just have to wait when we come back in March. So can I answer any more questions from you?
I believe, that the schedule of expenditures of federal awards is extremely important. Those reporting are very important to continue to get federal awards, for the city. So we have to potentially follow those mandates that are required by the feds, which I think is extremely important.
Absolutely. That number has gone up and down, but I think it's going to go up even more in the following years. There's a lot of federal funds that are available, especially this year.
So with the single audit, then can those items that are in question be corrected prior to the Fed's reports? So that way we take care of it prior to the reporting procedures. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So when we have this findings, there is absolutely an opportunity to correct them right away.
Great.
And that is what the management is doing after each of our audits.
So that's why having the proper auditors is extremely important, as you mentioned before in the prior slides.
True.
Okay, council members, any questions? Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and continue.
That actually, thank you, Eden. That concludes our session for tonight. To summarize, just last week, session 1, we went over your overall responsibilities as an audit committee. Tonight, we went over the fundamentals of municipal finance and a guide through your voluminous CAFR and the single audit. And we have 2 sessions remaining, which will come back to you in September and November. Session 3 will be over internal controls and compliance. And session 4 will be over the risk assessment process. So feel free to reach out to us beforehand. If you might have any questions that you'd like us to incorporate, we'll be very happy to do so. So thank you for your time and attention tonight. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, council members, especially for assisting us with the presentation tonight. So we really thank you.
And hopefully maybe by the fall that maybe we will have the whole council sitting here in the dais. Hopefully maybe the pandemic or COVID-19 might be to a point that we can all meet here as opposed to Zooming. But thank you. Thank you again for your excellent presentation. And council members, any additional questions or if not? Okay, Council Member Tehran.
I just want to say thank you again for the presentation. Very informative. I was taking lots of notes from it, and I just really appreciate your time and energy that you've all put into this, because obviously a lot. So thank you so much.
And also, again, thank you to our staff for the CAFR. You know, that's the staff is really responsible for the CAFR, and they've done an excellent job. And one of the things that I learned too is that in the past, we didn't take into consideration the capital items to come up with a comprehensive CAFR, you know, which I believe that's what you mentioned tonight. Is that correct? Very, very important.
Yes.
Thank you again. Thank you to staff and thank you for your excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, council members, any items for future agendas? Tehran or Councilwoman? No? Okay, if not, we are adjourned on this item, and our next item is community service and public services housing will be at 6:45. So we're adjourned as far as this item is concerned. Thank you so much.